We focus a lot on the microbiome here and how to build a healthy microbiome. But what are some of the things in our environment that people are commonly using or doing that are destroying that microbiome?
Well, the first thing is most people are taking antibiotics. Very hard to avoid antibiotics, and we certainly do need them. Usually at some point in our life, there'll be a point where we were glad we took antibiotics. It may have saved our life or stopped a major infection. But we probably overuse them about threefold. So, often treat viruses with antibiotics, which are completely ineffectual and just damage your gut microbes. So just questioning whether you need antibiotics or you should wait a bit longer, I think is important. There's obviously ultra-processed foods is the other probably big source of damage to your gut microbiome. Not only do they rarely have any fiber in them, because most of the food you have that's ultra-processed is absorbed early up in the gut and gets into the bloodstream very fast. None of the fiber gets to the colon and the microbes, so they're sort of effectively being starved. And then there's lots of other chemicals in ultra-processed foods and drinks that we now know disrupt the gut microbes, such as artificial sweeteners, emulsifiers, gums, certain preservatives, etc. So that's that whole other category of foods that we don't know precisely how they affect the gut microbes, but we know they give off abnormal signals when you test people giving those specific ones. And it could be that some people, there's an individuality to it. So there's some new data showing that some people particularly will respond badly to certain emulsifiers, like carrageenan, for example, and certain people, but not others, might respond badly to saccharin and sucralose. So they have a metabolic reaction to these things as well as a gut microbiome reaction. And I guess the third category is through the use of herbicides and pesticides. And this is a new area that hasn't really been studied. Aren't large-scale studies. They're very expensive to do. And as you can imagine, the industry isn't very keen to highlight it. We're so dependent on things like glyphosate and Roundup. But what I did find is, that there's huge differences in if you're a big strawberry lover, or you like your oat porridge, you're going to be eating 5 times more herbicides than anyone else, because there's 5 times more in those foods than the other foods you eat. So it pays to know where these things are coming from, and there's increasing evidence that these herbicides don't attack human cells or genes at all, because they've been well studied for that, but they do affect your gut microbes that aren't protected, and they change, and then your community will then produce abnormal chemicals as a result. And it's still theoretical, there's no hard proof of this, but it could be one reason that there are these examples of people with high exposures getting certain rare cancers, etc. So, we don't know the full story yet, but certainly there's room for concern if you're a vegetarian eating lots of plants that are sprayed regularly with herbicides and pesticides, or you are pregnant, or you've got young children eating a lot of these things, particularly lots of oats and berries, etc., that do get sprayed this way. So I think these are they're some of the common things that people often don't think about that can affect the gut microbiome that aren't related directly to food. But also living just in a city will impair your gut microbiome compared to being in the country.
How so?
Well, we don't really know, but just being close to nature, soil, all the microbes in animals, plants. I think cities are more sterile places. And so generally people who live in the countryside do have more diverse gut microbes than than people in cities. And you should always get a smelly dog and kiss a smelly dog if you want to improve your gut microbes.
Coming back to that herbicide, pesticide piece, Tim, are you somebody that when you can, you buy organic?
Yes. I'm not obsessional about it, but my regular fruits and vegetables, I do get organic. Because I've realized that in the last 10 years, as I've gone more plant-based, certainly I'm actually exposing myself more, ironically, to these chemicals than I was perhaps when I was eating more meats and just potatoes and things. So, yes, I try and do that, and I now, will wash them off more than I used to, and luckily I've given up things like oats, but that would have been a worry if I was on a regular oat breakfast. And breakfast cereals have a lot of these and they tend to be higher levels also in North America than in Europe. The levels permitted are greater. So it's perhaps another reason that, we should be switching to more organic plant. And the more people do it, the prices will then come down. So it's a sort of catch-22.
And pesticides aside, have you looked at any of the research that looks at, from a nutritional perspective, the difference of food that's organic versus conventional?
Yeah, I mean, there's some evidence that there's more omega-3 in organic meat, beef, than non-organic. There's some evidence that there are higher polyphenol counts in non-pesticide treated plants, which sort of makes sense in a way because they have to defend themselves. Therefore, they're tougher. And so if you're just spraying them all the time, they get a bit lazy and said, who needs defense chemicals when I've got, all that Roundup sprayed on me, and the soil is completely sterile, So there's that. And then there's been some epidemiology studies showing that in France, people who had regular organic foods did have less heart disease and cancers, although it's an observational study, so it's not by far definitive, but I think the evidence is building that really wasn't there a few years ago. So we are getting more and more evidence to support that it is worthwhile.
I'm glad you highlighted, Tim, there, the fact that these polyphenols are actually part of the defense mechanism of plants. And when they, have a harsher life, those are actually going to accumulate more within the plant.
Yes, and I think we're going to be hearing more of this sort of stuff as polyphenols start to get highlighted, as this becomes more general knowledge, because the food manufacturers can now manipulate some foods and plants to produce more polyphenols. And I was speaking to some food producer who makes organic foods in rather artificial scenarios, and they've worked out that just by putting a lot of wind into one of these tunnels, they get like 30% more polyphenol growth in those plants because they feel that they need more defenses. So I think in the future we can actually manipulate some of these foods to be healthier for us and move away from the iceberg lettuce, which clearly didn't have any foes at all, didn't need any polyphenols, to ones that are really, ready for a fight, and they're the ones. And it sort of explains it as well why there's more polyphenols at the tips of plants and on the outside leaves of plants and in the sprouts, all these places that, there's a lot of growth but it's a lot of danger. That's where all the good stuff is. And in a way, we've probably gone the other way. We always get rid of that stuff and go for the boring bits in the middle. So need to change our whole mindset. But it's fascinating.
Yeah, that is, and it's interesting to think of, this coevolution of plants and humans, and basically we're taking their defense mechanism and using that synergistically with our own biology to make ourselves healthier. It's just fascinating to think of it that way.
Yeah, it is. And of course, plants were around before humans. they've been interacting with other animals, but of course plants are interacting all the time with microbes in the soil. And that's how they've evolved, as sort of co-evolved systems where they're swapping nutrients and chemicals with those microbes in the soil. So we've come to the party late, really, but we're just finding out. But it just sort of shows that once you start to mess with the soil with all these fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides, you disrupt this normal link between the plants and the microbes that have been around for millions of years.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
I think we've gone far too far the wrong way, and we need to get back to much more natural methods, certainly. That's my go-to oil, and I think it's going to be the best for you.